We're going to start by learning how to solder some wires to each other. And then we'll learn other types of soldering later, but this is the most basic and probably the easiest kind of soldering to do. So to start with, wires. Your kit has this box of 6 different kinds of wire. They're not 6 different kinds, they're 6 different colors. And you're going to want to be able to cut and strip these wires. That's what this wire stripper is for. Before even opening the pack, I just wanted to show you the back of it. It says, applicable for stripping wire size. This thing, AWG, that's American wire gauge. That's just a sizing standard. And please note, it's a little bit of a funny scale in that the lower numbers are actually bigger wires. You can see that by comparing to the millimeter size. So 22 gauge is the biggest size listed here, and 30 gauge is the smallest. And this is 25 feet of, it doesn't tell you what size. So if I open this up and look, still doesn't, oh, it's real small. See that? Really, really, really little. This is 22 gauge wire. I thought it said it somewhere. 22 gauge. So this wire is going to fit in our wire stripper, which is obviously good news. To use the wire stripper, I'm going to take it out of the package. It's got actually multiple parts. It's kind of an interesting tool because it's multiple tools in one, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. Up here is kind of a pliers tool. By the way, you'll need to open this lock to be able to open it. So that's locked. You can store it that way. This is unlocked for use. Up here is kind of a pliers tool. You can use that for grabbing things. These are the strippers. They are labeled by their gauge numbers. Again, the bigger number, in this case 22, is the largest gauge. It says AWG, that's American wire gauge. And then this bottom part is a wire cutter. So it's basically like a heavy scissors. Do not use this to cut hard metals, as in steel. Steel is a hard metal that you can sort of try to cut with this, but you're going to screw it up. And you'll sort of chew up this tool, and it will stop being so useful to you. So let's just start by, let's imagine we want to join 2 wires together. So I'll just cut a length of this little piece of wire, and then I'll cut a yellow wire about the same length. So to do the soldering process, we need to have exposed metal that we meet with exposed metal. So right now there's just a tiny bit of exposed metal and it's a bunch of insulation. We want to strip off the insulation. That is the purpose of a wire stripper. What we're going to do is, you'll notice when I close this all the way, you can see the table in those white circles going through the stripper, and they're different sizes. This is 22 gauge wire, so it should be that I put the wire in here, grab it like that, and I should have cut through the insulation but not the metal. And look at that, I can use my thumbnail and just pull that right off. It's easier and less error prone to just make the cut first and use the correct size. So if I were to try to use a very small size, I'd probably chew into the metal of the wire, which is bad. I'm going to do the squeezing cut, okay? And now I can just strip off the insulation. So now we've got our exposed metal ready to go for the next step. There are 2 basic ways of joining these 2 wires, one of which is they come together like this, and the other of which is they come together like that. I'm going to show you the come together like this because it's more common. It's used in like electrical circuits in houses and stuff. Wires tend to come together this way. It's also the way you're going to want to wire it if more than 2 wires come together. So I'll just show you this, but is it possible to do your soldering like this? Sure it is. Let's just start by taking these, and we're going to twist them together. Now I am able, by squeezing with my fingers, to do a little bit of twisting, but not an awful lot. This is a great time to use the little plier bits at the end of the tool. I'm grabbing the wires and making a tighter, better twist. You want to begin with a nice, solid mechanical connection, followed up with solder. The solder is going to melt into there and make it work and make it more solid, but you want to begin with a mechanical connection that's very trustworthy. So I can't just like yank these apart. You get the idea. Next, it's time to actually do the soldering. So I'm going to bring my soldering iron into the frame. I'm going to put the iron on its stand. Again, this is my paperclip stand, but you may have a different stand, or might not. You might have this one. And here is the little soldering control device. You can turn it on and off. You can change the temperature up and down. No J kidding. For some reason, this soldering iron, I can't turn the temperature up. It was working, and then it stopped working. I actually found out that in the case of this iron, I'm doing just fine. The lowest temperature will work for what I need. So I want to generally use the lowest possible temperature. So I'm going to keep it at 280. This is in degrees Celsius, by the way. So 280 should be okay. And I'm going to introduce my fan. Remember, so I'm making a whole little setup here. I've got my iron on the table. I've got my fan here, and I'll move it a little bit towards me so you can see a little bit better on that view. The fan is close to the work so that it's when smoke comes off of this, it's going to get drawn into the fan and go off that way. And there's no reason not to just start the fan now. Get it going. It'll make a little bit of sound, and that's okay. I will speak over it. So let's actually return to the close-in view, and I'll show you how the soldering is actually done. I'm actually going to solder in such a way right now that I leave the soldering iron here, and it is plugged in and it's hot, so I'm being careful with it. I'm going to leave it here and bring the stuff I'm soldering to it, rather than holding the iron and bringing it to the stuff I'm soldering, to the work. Just because for what I'm doing right now, I'd actually prefer to have my two hands free. With my right hand, I am a righty. With my right hand, I'm going to be manipulating the solder itself. And I took a little bit of solder out of this spool and I sort of pulled it out so I have a nice long tail of it. And that'll be with my right hand. I'm going to start by doing something that's called tinning the iron. And I'm just going to put a little bit of solder on, and notice two things. Thing number one, a little puddle of liquid solder. The solid becomes liquid. And thing two, I see smoke being sucked into the fan, which is great. That means the fan is working. So I've put a little bit of solder on the iron to start. I'm now going to take this thing and put it into contact with the iron. I'm trying to sort of make good mechanical contact. It's not a very, very light touch. I'm really holding it in place with a little bit of solidity. And now I'm waiting for this metal to warm up. Once I think it might have warmed up, I can begin trying to introduce solder onto the metal. And notice that the wires themselves are hot enough that I can actually melt the solder right onto them. That's ideal. That's going to make for a nice solid joint. Melting the solder onto the wires themselves, not onto the iron. It is not a paintbrush. I'm melting it onto the wires themselves. I'll try to get an even closer view. And there's no reason to keep holding that on the iron any longer. This part is, of course, still hot, but this part's going to pretty rapidly cool down because it's pretty small. And when I'm finished, it's not the most beautiful joint in the world, but you'll see that that solder has flowed. I'll turn off the fan for the moment. That solder has flowed all around there. It's made a liquid puddle around the wires, which has solidified. And there you go. That solder joint is complete. To finish up, you should wrap some electrical tape around this joint. You should insulate it because otherwise this long piece of conductive wire is very liable to touch something else and create an electrical short. It's as easy as that.